So thank you everyone for coming out and making the time. Thank you for our club for hosting the space and getting us all together. Very fortunate to have the team pulling in cool events like this. Quick just introduction about myself. My name is Vlad Dojsic. I work for a company called Racing Edge. We make software solutions for the motorsports market, auction software, web development, things of that nature. And of course, this is Ron Reichert. And Ron is the sporting director of Ferrari's AF Corse program and does a lot of cool things in motorsports that we're just about to get to. Adam, did you want to hit the AC? Yeah. Just in case that's screaming on your video. But this is Ron. Ron, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
We've got an awesome, interesting kind of group of people here ready to learn more about yourself, your career, and the motorsport world in general. So what we'll do is, as we spoke earlier, is if you want to kind of open the floor, let everyone know kind of who you are, and if you want to kick off with kind of where did your motorsports journey begin as a kid and how that created a career for you.
Yes. Hi everyone. I'm Ron Reichert, in motorsports, in the management, a lot on the sporting side. Sounds much more exciting than it is. It's actually quite a lot of pain in the ass, but I still enjoy it. I've been in motorsport kind of like forever. I was brought into motorsports through my dad, who was working in DTM himself. So I was probably that big when I was the first time annoying people in the garage, running around and probably more keeping people away from work than getting their work done. But it definitely infected me with the racing virus. So it became my dream. My weekends were filled with a lot of time in front of the TV, day and night. Till I finally had the chance to start to be old enough and do internships. And I think the first internship I did was, I was a tire guy in Formula 3 when I was 14.
Oh, wow.
So all my friends went on nice holidays with their families, and I begged my dad to call whoever he knows to find me somewhere to go in the holidays and do some work for free for teams. So yeah, from cleaning the pits, overdoing the tires, washing the dirty underfloors.
Yeah.
I made the way, and yeah, step by step, kept growing on it, and now I'm fortunate enough to have grown through some factory involvements, some factory teams, and now I'm working with Ferrari in the DTM.
I like how you segued from, I was an intern to, and then I worked with some teams, and now I'm with Ferrari. Is there, and it's very cool to hear that you had your father was actually working for DTM as the series? Yeah. Or a team?
For a manufacturer.
Oh, for a manufacturer.
Yeah, he was doing engine development for, back then it was Opel.
Right.
So yeah, he was on the development side. I was used to not see my dad a lot, and it was always exciting to see him then on the track or on TV. And, yeah. And
if you want to elaborate a bit further, then really it's just like you got the internship position, you obviously got the bug from the family, as you said, the virus, the motorsport virus, and that evolved into your passion. What kind of route did you really take, though? If you want to elaborate on that, we briefly spoke about, not a lot of people know the jobs in motorsport.
Yeah.
Right? Everyone thinks it's just a driver and a bunch of people, but those bunch of people are, thousands and thousands of people around the world doing all sorts of really cool tasks to make a team function. So if you want to touch a little bit on kind of from intern, where did you go from there?
I really did kind of everything. Started, or let's say the first probably 8 to 10 years, you kind of work for free wherever you can. You do whatever you get the chance to do. You really have to use the time you get to spend with any team. So I did from tire guy over supporting the mechanics, then obviously graduating in school, starting university in the same time. I studied mechanical engineering, but specialized on vehicles and the engines itself. Then starting to be on the engineering side, supporting the engineers, even just preparing how the screen will look, how the screens are put in the garage. Just there's so many small things that at the end someone needs to do their job, because when it comes to racing, everyone goes out and everything needs to be ready. And it's not the engineer at the end of the day himself who prepares how the pit wall looks with the 10 screens we have, and that he has exactly the same working place in the truck. That is another very low-end entry engineer who's preparing all these things. So I went through those kind of jobs, and made myself through a data engineer, which means you're doing the evaluation with the drivers, looking at the data, at the videos, over then engineering the car myself. And while doing all that, continuously still studying, evolving into studying management, because it was for me since very early age clear that the management and the sporting side, especially the rules, reading rules, understanding what's gray areas, where can we play with something, that was always fascinating for me. But to be able to really understand the rules, you need to have done everything which is kind of covered by the rules. You cannot just, otherwise everyone would just put lawyers on the job. So yeah, so I went all the way, and at the end finally was able to step up and get into the management side.
Interesting, very exciting, and that's again one of those things that people don't understand: the pits, the timing boxes, the truck. I mean, there's so many moving parts to a team that it's really impressive to see it all come together in a race weekend. What would you say then in your kind of journey to Ferrari? What were some highs, some lows? What were some brands that you worked with? Some drivers you got to kind of engage with, and what would you say are the kind of the highs and lows of the journey?
I think the biggest high or the biggest highlight for sure is doing DTM. It's quite cool. 25 years ago, I visited my dad in DTM, and now he visits me in DTM. I think that's something not many even in motorsports can say that. So that's something. It was a very proud moment for myself. The other highs, I think Super GT in Japan, which is the pendant to DTM, was definitely a highlight. It's a very, very closed Japanese world. Everything is in Japanese. So I needed a translator with me for anything I did. For every meeting, I had a translator sitting next to me. Every meeting is in Japanese. And I was there with an international entered team, and we managed to break all records to be the most successful international team ever in Super GT. So that is definitely a big high as well. Apart from that, I think Macau Grand Prix. Everyone probably knows Macau Grand Prix, like the Monaco of Asia. We had some pretty cool stories happening there. It's a very crashy race. A lot happens in a very short amount of time. And in 2017, I was there with WRT, with the factory team from Audi, and we had really, really severe damage in the first race on Saturday, which is the qualification race. And we had so big damage that we did not have enough parts, and it was not possible to get them by airplane from anywhere on Earth. And we kept booking plane tickets for people trying to bring the parts and just make it happen. And at the end, we found that a kind of friend of us who also owned the race car had it actually for display in one of the casinos in Macau. So we went there around midnight with a trailer and just pulled it out of the casino, out of his exhibition, obviously with his agreement, and brought it in and built up a complete new car overnight, and just made it in time on Sunday to be able to race. That's definitely one of the highlights.
That's wild.
Yeah.
And this was in Super GT?
No, that was Macau Grand Prix.
Oh, sorry, the Grand Prix.
Yeah,
sorry, yes,
Macau Grand Prix.
Sorry. Yeah, that's wild. Funny enough, the R Club racing team had to rip out a transmission just at the track the other day. I don't know where the team is, but I heard you guys did a wonderful job. You met someone in a Walmart parking lot. And
That's amazing.
It's crazy to hear, like at all levels, this problem solve, figure it out, because it's motorsport. It's crazy. Things happen, crashes, things break.
It just gets more expensive.
Yeah.
That's the only thing. Yeah. For us, you always can add a few zeros to the whole bill. But
what's your season budget? Is that a shareable thing?
I can't put a proper number here on it, but it's a good 7-digit amount per car. So it's a few million euro we have to spend for the two cars, and that's just to run the whole thing. That's not buying anything of it. It's without the cost of the car, the trucks, or whatever. It's literally just our running cost is a few million euro.
Wow, that's pretty wild.
Yeah, but we are a lot of people.
Right, as you were saying, Ferrari shows up with 40 people, 2 cars,
Yes.
all the trimmings that you could need. Then I can kind of segue into, you've mentioned the Ferrari kind of being the highlight of your career, and of course getting back into DTM and kind of following your father's footsteps there. What is the thing you do when you come to a new team, when you come to a new challenge, let's say? Where do you begin? We discussed the rule book earlier. You're saying you've already been reading the rule book for a month or 2 now,
Yeah.
And you make your notes and everything, but kind of like where, there's so many pieces of a team, and then how do you approach like the holistic puzzle of each kind of department and of course the driver and all the other things?
When you join a new company, team or whatever, and like now when I joined Ferrari, you join one of the most successful manufacturers and teams on earth in motorsports. So the last thing you want to do is just change everything, because that will not work out. But obviously there's always something you can improve. There's nothing which is perfect. We all try to be perfect, and especially in motorsports we really want to get to that point. But no one will be able to manage it. You can get very close, but never going to achieve it. So when I arrived, we sat down and we had all a very long meeting and conversation and tried to understand where can the whole entity or the whole program be improved, where may be a missing link, but which areas are really, really good. And I mean, areas that are very, very good is, for example, setting the car up, having all the technical things being at 110%. I don't need to arrive at Ferrari and explain them how to put an Italian car together, because it's, first of all, I'm not Italian, so that's already the wrong start.
You need a translator for that, is if you need it. So
Exactly.
it's a lot.
No, but then we figured out that probably one of the things where I can bring the most value is definitely being German and being strict, being very often, I think, a lot of pain in the ass to others, just by giving them shit. And yeah, so I think that was one of the major things where we really spent a lot of time. We did a lot of improvement. We like in DTM, you have very, very concentrated days. So at the end, we end up that everyone has every day his own schedule, which is a full page. It's basically by minute where who has to be at what time and to do what. And that's something where being the over-organized German definitely was a help, being able to plan ahead compared to on an Italian, more emotional side, who's more acting emotional, I would say. So you find these kind of things where you really start to click and you bring the best of the two always together. So
it's really funny to hear you mention the cultural differences between the brands and the teams. I mean, I've heard it from kind of Valentino Rossi, going from Japanese Yamaha to Italian Ducati, and the Italians are like, the bike is fine, and he's like, the bike's not fine. They're like, the bike's fine, and then he's like, well, they're not listening to me. And it's funny to hear you brought that kind of German regimented, precision to a team which obviously has the passion and the heritage. It's cool to see the kind of fusion of those two elements worked out very well. I'm going to kick it over to Malcolm. I saw a hand go up.
Yeah, I had a quick question. With DTM, that's pretty much the first pro GT3 series in the world. With that, and also it being a sprint racing series, is there anything you guys did to the cars to make them more suited to sprint racing? Because usually you beef them up for endurance racing, so you put on the thicker pads, thicker rotors, stuff like that. Did you go the opposite way with anything?
yeah,
Yeah, okay, yeah.
yes, you
So
go more.
What did you do? What were the things that you refined to make them only last 20 laps or something?
You look what is not homologated, and then you go more extreme with let's start a bit earlier. We are racing GT3 cars. That means each car has a homologation. It's homologated by the FIA, by the International Sporting Directive or organization. So there's certain parts on the car that cannot just be changed. They need to be as homologated, as submitted before. And there's always some area where you can play. I mean, you were talking about the brakes. Brakes is definitely one thing, like brake pads, the rotors itself, and so on. There's a lot of room, and then you end up really starting to develop your own brake pads. And then you're able to have a brake pad that after 1 hour there's nothing left. Literally nothing.
Right.
And yeah, and there's a lot of these kind of things where you can really just go much more to the limit, but obviously you always have to see how far you can be within the homologation.
Right. Trying to stay within the rules, but find the unfair advantage. And
Yeah.
well, that kind of more applies to a car setup as well. But yeah, so we were speaking about Ferrari, we were speaking about DTM. To the audience here today, I'm not sure if you're aware, but the two drivers that Ron was working with, one was Alex Albon, obviously former Formula One driver, and Liam Lawson, who's an up-and-coming driver, clinched the F3 championship in his rookie year, right? I'm not out to lunch on that. So what was the dynamic, having Alex coming down from F1, having Liam kind of coming up the ranks, and at the same time, neither of them has ever driven a GT car, or at least raced in GT racing. So what was it like for you to watch these two get along? Or
it was quite amazing. We started really with a very mixed feeling, because obviously you only have 8 race weekends, so it's a very short kind of season, if you want to put it like that. You have 16 races, but it's only on 8 weekends. And you get two guys in the car who have no experience with GT cars whatsoever. They may be very good in Formula cars, but maybe they are not quick in a GT car. So you try to go testing and so on, and after the first testing, or even within the first outing of the first test, we were very happy, that I can say, because there's just some moves in a car where you can see what is pure talent. I think especially Liam is someone who just is in a different dimension once he's in a car. But then, yeah, the two, I think, gave themselves the biggest pressure. For Liam, it was, he's trying to build his career, so it's a completely different pressure than Alex, who wanted to go back into Formula One. Alex already knew how great Formula One is, and he knew he has to do well to go back to Formula One. If he's going to be nowhere in DTM, he will lose the media value. Red Bull may not support him or whatever. There's a lot of pressure those guys made themselves. And Liam was on the complete opposite. He saw how great Formula One can be, how close it is, but he also saw how quick you can be demoted, out of Formula One. Mm-hmm. And for both of them, it's not that they have the financial background to just say, okay, Red Bull is not supporting me, I do it by myself, because it costs millions of dollars a year what we are doing, and they need someone like Red Bull to really support them. So yeah, I think they made themselves the biggest pressure, but it was amazing to work with them.
Right. Yeah, it's so incredible that you got to work with those two talents of all people. And to your point about the pressure, right? People might not be aware, but you see an F1 driver, you're like, oh, they're an F1. But as soon as they come out of F1, if they have any hope to come back, it's like every move you make has to be calculated.
Yeah.
And that's unfortunately why we don't see more drivers doing, IMSA endurance events or WEC endurance events, which is a big shame.
Yeah.
It would be super cool to see some of these drivers coming over and competing in DPI and the hypercar era and stuff like that. But back to the DTM subject, if you want to kind of share with the team here, you mentioned that everything, this was Ferrari's first year competing in DTM. Yes. So it was a big deal. And obviously, as we kind of know here, Ferrari is a very passionate, very serious brand about their racing. And you kind of mentioned to me before the chat started that it kind of came together last minute.
Yes.
And obviously worked out quite well. But if you wanted to tell the team, kind of how it came together last minute, and then give them the crescendo of the season and kind of where it went for you guys.
Yeah, it came really together very, very last minute. So that was a big, big challenge. If you go to a championship where you've never been, with, let's say, a car that was never made for that kind of sprint race. It's not that the other manufacturers' cars are made for it, but like you guys said, or like you said before, it's mostly endurance racing and not 55-minute races. And then you arrive with a new pit stop format that has not been done in any other championship in that way. And you have two drivers in the car who never raced GT cars. So it's an interesting first outing, let's put it like that. But I think, yeah, like you said, we managed very well. We put in the hours. Once we had everything confirmed, and together we started to go testing, just get the things rolling and go out there. and get it done. And then you arrive at the first, let's say the first official test where everything is mandatory and you don't know where the others are. For us, we arrived at the first test not in the state which we wanted to be. I think performance-wise it was okay, but everything else, it's quite a big effort what DTM is. Just to give you guys an idea, so for 2 cars we are 40 people. We have proper engineering trucks behind the garage, so we have really trucks which are just full of people analyzing every single movement in the car. And our garage is completely built up, let's say parallel for both cars, with each pit wall stand, a full engineering room behind, and so on. And normally in GT racing you go testing, but in DTM you go testing, and it's like in Formula 1 right now, where you are there and it's a full setup. So you start to have to be there 1.5 days before to have everything ready, to understand the things. And that was a big challenge in the very beginning, just by being late. But after that, yeah, we got it all together. We went through the season, had a lot of success, fortunately. Unfortunately, we didn't win. But
Bit of drama in the last round.
yes.
Very last round, unfortunately. But Ferrari did come out with the Constructors' Championship, you were saying?
Team champion.
Sorry, team,
Yes.
yeah. Which is a big deal. I
Yes.
mean, Ferrari's first time in DTM, you come out with a championship.
Yes. Yes, and it's the first time a non-German team won the team championship. So it's also something quite cool.
We got a question over there, yeah.
Yeah, I was curious. 40 people, it's a real number. How does that divide out? Like, is it 20
Good
per
question.
team, and are there some overlap on both cars, or they all overlap on both cars, or some just sitting there at telemetry and some mechanic? Can you kind of describe how the team breaks down?
Sure.
Great question, by the way.
So let's say we start with the management. The management obviously is the same for both cars. So we have a technical director, then we have myself as a sporting director. So that's kind of the 2 decision makers. From there, then each car has their own engineering department, which is a lead engineer who has then data engineer, performance engineer, and so on underneath him. Each car has a fixed mechanics crew. Then we have one crew which is partially out of the mechanics of the 2 cars, but we also have some guys which are really just there for the pit stop. So we have one pit stop crew, because you're only allowed to do one car at a time. So you're not allowed to come in with both cars. It's one pit stop station, like one of this gantry per 2 cars. Same like in Formula 1. So we have a specific crew for that, because it's really any second you can find at the pit stop, the driver doesn't have to risk their life even further or potentially even crash the car. And then outside of that, let's say car specific thing, we have overlooking for every, let's say, specifics of the car, engineers who are not allocated to one car. Let's say we have some guys looking only at the electrics, we have some guys only looking at the brakes, someone only looking at the dampers. Then we have someone looking at aerodynamics. It sounds really like stupid, but even on a GT car, you can see the slightest change on a ride height, on a wing. They will do a completely new simulation of the aerodynamics of the car, where we will come out, how will it evolve the tire consumption. And then we have a few guys who are just doing the simulation for the race. So we have doing each race, or let's say doing every session. We kind of have it running with them in the background, just so we are all always in it. And then during every race, we all get things pulled on our screens by those guys, just different strategies that other teams may run. How it would evolve if we pit now, how it would evolve if the car in front of us or our target car, who we fight in the championship, if they pit now, where would they come out? How would the offset be just because of the tire degradation? So there's a massive amount of simulation done, even for a 55-minute race.
And just for reference, like what would be an average team to carry a GT car in another series? You're saying Ferrari was providing 40 for the 2 cars?
Yeah.
What would be kind of an average if you were doing a different league, a different series, and a different manufacturer?
In GT World Challenge, you can say you have maximum 10 cars, 10 people per car, and that's already on let's say on an endurance base.
Wow.
So it's on a much smaller scale, even though you have much more running time. But just the level of competition is so high that every hundredths of a second you can find really counts. So you need to have the right people behind, and you need to use every hour you can.
Right on. Yeah, it's pretty wild having that scale. I see Malcolm is going for a question.
So in Asia and with the GT World Challenge, I'm assuming it was probably a Pirelli spec tire.
Yes.
What was the biggest difference moving over to the Hankook spec tire in DTM?
We're running Michelin.
Oh, Michelin, sorry. Michelin. Okay.
No worries. There was a lot of fuss about the tire in the very beginning because we are running a very soft compound compared to the other Michelin tires run around. So everyone was struggling with tire degradation. That was the biggest headache for everyone. And since there was only so much or only very little time after the official tests to the first event, everyone was kind of going a little bit into the blue. But let's say it's back to the simulation. You need to understand the tire. You need to see that you have a very soft compound, which it really makes. Let's say I think it's very beneficial to a short race because it makes the undercut and the overcut possible. If you would run a Pirelli tire, which you run in most of the other championships, which has a very little tire degradation, means you basically come out again exactly in the same order. But for us, pitting one lap early when the simulation, when the guys told us, you got to pit now because the tire deck now in the next lap will be much bigger, you're losing more time. You could really do the undercut and you came out in front of the car you were behind before, just by them pitting one lap later. So I think it was something very positive to compare it to the other tires. I'm not saying they are worse, but for the short period we are racing, I think it's great to have a very soft compound.
Right on. And I think we can kind of jump into something very interesting, very unique to Ron. Ron had this pit stop strategy that he developed and brought to Ferrari after kind of ripping through the rule book of DTM racing, and you were able to find 1.7 seconds on a pit stop, right? This is the number?
Something like that.
Something like that. And it was very coveted for kind of finding this strategy. And yeah, I think all the other teams were quite upset that you found this advantage. But if you want to tell the team here, what did you find? And also just how did you find it? If you want to talk to them about going through the regulations and what you do,
sure.
And then how it came to be.
Sure. So yeah, normally the regulations are very clear on the pit stops, which person has to do what, and the kind of movements are very clear, structured. And mostly as well, you have less people than we have in DTM. And if you have more people, then you mostly do refueling or something else. So we arrived in DTM in a very specific new environment for a pit stop. So when we realized, okay, the regulations are not very binding on the order of movements the guys have to do and what tire to do when, first the front or the rear tires. And it did not say anywhere that one wheel has to be completed before another wheel can be changed. And that was for us where we started to think, okay, are they not forgetting something? So I also don't want to take all the credit. It was a team effort because sure. we really sat down and started to move the people around on the whiteboard, and everyone made their drawings how the mechanics could run during the pit stop. Because in theory everything is nice, but the people also need to be able to run around in a very short period of time. So what we ended up with is that is also a Ferrari and Mercedes specific thing, is that the wheel nut is attached to the wheel. So if you take off, like if you unscrew with the wheel gun the wheel nut, it will not fall down like you guys are used to it from most of the cars. It's with a kind of a spring attached to the rim itself. So when the car came in, our guys started already to go onto the nut of the front wheel while the car was still moving, to just unscrew them, then run to the back, do the back wheel, take it off. The mechanic puts the new one on, put that one on. In the meantime, there was a second mechanic who changed the rims or the wheels on the front. So the other guy with the wheel gun just had to come back and just tighten it in the front, and the car was good to go. All the other teams did it in the way they're used to, which says in the regulations one wheel has to be completed before the other one can be done. So they came in, they did the front one, the guy waited with the wheel gun, the other one put it on, he screwed it on, he ran to the back, and he did the same. So they had a lot of waiting time in between, and that's where we found 1.7 second on the rest.
That's pretty remarkable.
Yes.
Like I can only imagine how excited you guys must have been, going through the regulations, and then one of you is like, wait a minute, it doesn't say we have to finish the tire change. It just says, there's interpretation.
We were quite surprised that no one else found it.
Right.
So when we arrived at the first race weekend, actually already at the first official tests, we saw everyone is doing the pit stops like always. So we said, okay, we are not doing any pit stops. So we came to the first race weekend, and since we knew that everyone is kind of, or we hoped everyone was still doing the same, we brought the whole team a week earlier to the workshop to do pit stop training, because we said we're not going to do it at the track at all. Before the first race, no one ever saw a pit stop of us. So everyone kind of thought those guys are really stupid. Everyone in the evening, normally all the teams doing the pit stop practice for an hour or something, multiple times a day. And everyone was doing it, and we went to the hotel. And everyone was like, those guys, they are too arrogant and whatever. And then in the first race, we delivered something very nice.
nice for you guys, but a misery for the other teams.
Yes. But then it was no more secret. So then we could start to do the practice on track. We didn't have to go earlier to the workshop. Like the week before was then being able to be used for something else.
And you mentioned before the chat started that you're currently looking at the regulations for this season.
Yes.
What have you found this year? Do you want to share with us now, or is that top secret? How does that look?
You will need to finish now one wheel before doing the next one. So.
Oh, did they put that in? Oh.
So we only got through it for one season, but yeah. For the rest, let's see. We have a lot of remarks. Let's see how many things will still change. It's still a long way to go before we go racing again.
When does it start again?
Sorry?
When does it start again?
In April. So
April.
Still some time to go.
And who are your drivers this year?
That's a very good question.
No, still not confirmed?
No.
Okay, exciting. We're doing actually a team simulator challenge here. We actually have some really fast people on the board. So if you need, I'm sure one or two of these guys and girls here can help you. You also mentioned, and actually, I'll just open it to the floor very quickly. Is there any DTM Ferrari related questions before I kind of jump? There we go, Roger.
How good is the AlphaTauri gear?
The clothing?
Yeah.
It's amazing. It's really, really good quality. I have to say.
Yeah, that's a good answer.
I have to say it's quite amazing. All our team gear really was from AlphaTauri, so it's the normal. All the products we were wearing are actually the ones you can purchase, and we didn't manage to break one single piece, even the mechanics. So it's really, really good gear. I really love the winter jacket because it's really very functional. It's very functional and it looks great.
We'll clip that video footage and send it to AlphaTauri. We'll make sure you get your royalties and all that. And actually, I was going to jump into the Aston Martin conversation we're having, but I want to ask something about the driving styles of Alex and Liam. Is there anything kind of distinct that you could share about how they drive, how they like the car setup? Kind of what is the strength of one of them versus kind of what is the strength of the other, or anything to that effect?
I think you can see the experience of the two in their driving style. You have someone like Alex who has a lot of experience and he's been to much more different circuits in the world compared to Liam. So he knows much more how to position the car to really have a flow, how to do a proper lift and coast, safe tires and so on. Whilst for Liam is more trying, which is, I think, not a bad thing, because Liam very often tried something which Alex may have not tried, and it worked. So I think by putting those two together, it was really the perfect kind of balance, because you have one very open-minded trying, and you have someone very, very experienced. So yeah, it's quite difficult, quite different, but it worked perfect together.
Cool.
Did the tire management of Alex's experience with tire management in Formula One, did that transfer well to the soft Michelin tires in DTM?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. It was a big help.
Okay.
Yes.
Did he teach Liam a thing or two?
Yeah. No, for sure, for sure. And that was also, I think that's how he managed to win with such a margin at the Nürburgring, when it was this damp, wet conditions. He was just driving in a different league, because he was able to keep it together and not overdrive it, not underdrive it. He just kept it at a line, whilst the others were going much, much quicker and then had a huge drop. So for him, he just knew where was the limit of the tire all the time.
That's interesting. It's so cool to hear that experience, how that plays a part, because I mean, even in DTM, you're dealing with top drivers around the world, incredible drivers, but there's always that little open wheel step with Formula One, where it's just a different resolution or a different feel of everything they do, and it must have been really exciting for you to have Alex on the team and get to work with him. That would have been super cool. I want to ask you about Aston Martin.
Yes.
Ron is also now I don't actually know the technical title, so I'm not going to butcher it. But if you Google Ron, you'll find articles that he is now the something for Aston Martin in Asia, if you want to speak to that.
Yes. So together with some partners and investors, we took over Aston Martin Racing Asia, which means the distributorship and being the official representative for the brand in the region. It's being on the other side, not racing the cars ourselves. We are actually trying to plan the strategy, trying to see how teams or drivers can be supported the best, bringing the cars out, making sure there's proper support on engineering, on a factory driver, on a spare parts side, and so on. So very different business perspective.
Right. Yeah. As you're saying, on the other side of it now, and supplying cars, supplying parts to everyone. On this note, in terms of the world of the business of motorsport, what are the kind of exciting things that you see? You know, we spoke briefly about earlier before the chat about GT4 racing and kind of the explosion that's had. Now GT3 racing is kind of doing a Pro-Am thing, and GTE is kind of fading away, or GTLM, sorry. What kind of opportunities do you see in motorsport? What are the segments you see growing? How does customer racing evolve? Where does obviously factory manufacturer teams kind of grow from here?
I think GT4 and GT3 is definitely great platforms. GT4 may have had too much of a boom in a very short time, so there was some brands throwing out cars which had not been up to the standard they could be, I would say. So now we are approaching a time in GT4, I think, where everyone has a more or less second generation of car out there, and they are much more advanced than the first gen. So that's a very good, very competitive, but also very budget-oriented kind of racing. I think that's definitely going to keep having a future, because it's kind of the entry level into GT racing, and you can really evolve from there into something. And additionally, most of the GT4 cars are based on the same platform as their GT3 pendant is. So a driver that is doing well in a Aston Martin or Audi GT4 will feel very quickly at home in a GT3. So the brands can pull the people through that and pick very early who to support. Looking at the future also, like you mentioned, on the amateur, pro and M side and the Le Mans side, I think the GT cars based on the GT3 will stay kind of on top in the GT, since they will be eligible for Le Mans in the future in a maybe slightly different spec as well. The whole Pro-Am thing, I'm a big fan of that. I think M's should not be called M's. In my opinion, they should be called gentleman driver, because they are definitely not amateurs. They are quick, and they do this a lot of time, they go to proper tracks, they are with proper teams, with factory supported teams, because even the brands have interest to win in a Pro-Am category. So they are still going to support this car with a huge factory effort. But I think it should not be called Pro-Am, because it does not do the so-called amateur driver justice. They are gentleman drivers, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, funny enough to your point, I mean, we just saw with Daytona was the first kind of implementation of this new Pro-Am GT3 thing, and you had the Am cars going faster than some of the Pro cars, which, you know, makes not a lot of sense to call them amateurs. But at the same time, it's kind of, I personally found it slightly weird that there was no balance of performance difference. You know, it's not the GT3 for the Pro cars was unbridled GT3. They kind of just kept the same platform and said, it'll sort itself out, right?
I don't think that's wrong. I don't think that's wrong. I think the BOP is such a complex process. If you start to apply different BOPs to the same car, but just in different classes with different drivers, it starts to become too much of a sandbagging and what bullshit game.
Oh, right.
Now most of the GTM cars had a factory driver on board, and in Daytona we saw qualifying. All of a sudden, you have a guy who everyone knows is 1.5 seconds slower than his teammates, and he put the car on in the top 3 in a pre-qualifying or qualifying. So everyone immediately know, okay, there's a brand sandbagging like hell. But if you start to have different BOPs, then this is not going to be that obvious anymore, because now the same BOP applies, and you have a M driver, gentleman driver, whatever, being much closer to a factory driver than he would ever be. So the brand was sandbagging.
Is there a way that, because I'm not sure that everyone here knows what BOP is there a way that you could quickly summarize it?
Sure. So BOP is balance of performance. That means all the different car concepts in GT racing, where you have front engine, rear engine, mid-engine cars, completely different aerodynamics and very different power output, just comparing an Audi R8 with a V10 engine compared to a Porsche with the small Boxster engine, is just not being able to have the same power output at every level. And then you have turbocharged cars, turbocharged V8s and so on. I mean, there's so many different concepts of cars and engines that they implemented this balance of performance just to trying to bring them to a different level, to a same level, all the different concepts. You have cars which are really, really fast on the straight. They will forever be maybe faster on the straight than the others, but then you need to give the others something to make it back in the corner. So by having different weights in the car, having to run different ride heights, having a limited rear wing angle, for example, that you're not allowed to go flatter or you're not allowed to have more rear wing, they try to find a way to really balance out all the cars for a fair competition.
BOP.